Hello, guys, and welcome back to a brand new episode of Crooked Illness. Today is going to be an exciting and informative conversation on our struggles being in the way or on the way to where we want to be. Joining me to chat about this is my awesome guest, Dean Fox. Dean is a leading mindset coach, trainer, consultant, entrepreneur, and speaker based in the northeast of England. Dean has trained and coached thousands of entrepreneurs across the country with his powerful message. I'm excited to have him here today to talk about this, hear more about his story, and take away so much value from this talk. So without further ado, welcome Dean to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Paris. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, pleasure to have you on and get to chat with you today. So I'm so excited to hear from you before we dive right into this. Let's just kick it off here with a little background about you. Tell me who you are and a nice overview of your story.
Okay, sure. So my background's in engineering and then in sales and business development within the corporate world. And I had a fairly good corporate career. So I rose the ranks fairly quickly. I was always kind of pushing myself to be the best that I possibly could. And by kind of late 90s, early 2000, I was, sales manager for a blue chip company in the UK. I ran a sales team across the country, expense account, company car, nice house. Everything looked like it was kind of going in the right direction, but I didn't really feel fulfilled, if I'm being honest. They kept feeling like there was something missing.
Yeah.
And so I decided that the way to fulfill that, the way to make me feel good enough was to set up my own business. And then I thought, when I was successful in my own business, then that's when I'd feel good enough and everything would be okay. I'd be happy. And so I jumped in that in the early 2000s. My wife and I set up a property development investment business, real estate, as you guys would know in the US. And, that went really well. By kind of 2007, we had a multi-six-figure business. Life was good. Things were working out really well. And then we had a period from end of 2007, beginning of 2008, till about end of 2010, where things didn't really go so well. 2008, we had the financial crisis that affected lots of people around the world. The difficulty over that period of time between 2008 and early 2009, we ended up losing that business along with lots of other things. We had some other investments and we lost those as well during that period, and it put a lot of financial pressure on us. And I made a decision that one of the things that I would be able to do to kind of steady the ship, if you like, would be to go back into the corporate world, go back and get a job and do, what I was good at effectively in sales. And that's what I tried to do. But early 2010, while I was on that kind of road looking for another opportunity, my wife and I had a really bad car accident along with my youngest son. And we were out of the game for about 12 months recovering. And that put paid to me being able to go back and get a job in the corporate world. And that led to a number of things: increased financial pressure, and I really struggled from a personal point of view. My own mental health and the way I saw the world. I found it really difficult over that period of time. And I suppose by the end of that year, as well as losing the businesses and some investments, by that time I was bankrupt personally. We'd lost a few of the other properties that we had, and I'd come to a decision by then that I didn't feel like I could go on. I didn't really feel like I had anywhere to turn. And I thought that the world and my family at the time would be better off without me. And I made a decision. Late 2010, I'd gone out for a morning walk. I told my wife I needed some fresh air, some space to think. But, I tell this story often. I had no intention of coming home that day. I went to some woodland near where I lived with the express intention of taking my own life. And something happened that day. When I made the actual decision, when I got there, I was angry with everybody, with the world, with myself. I was frustrated. I was emotional. But when I actually made the decision, when I was standing there and I'd said, right, this is it, I'm definitely not going back. The world would be better off without me. Having made that decision, it was almost like, and I don't know how long this lasted, it could have been just a few seconds, but it was almost like the world stood still. Everything went really slow, and I, I was like a weight lifted off my shoulders. I felt really calm, really kind of peaceful. And I saw for the first time enough breathing space and enough clarity to ask myself some questions about, why was I there then? Why should I take my life when I didn't die in a car accident that I should have probably died in 10 months earlier? And all those questions started to resonate. And I made another decision in that kind of moment, which was, maybe now's not the right time. Maybe there is a reason that I'm here. Maybe there's a reason why I'm going through all the things I'm going through. And I'm not sure what that is, but maybe I'm supposed to find out. And those questions were enough to kind of bring me back, if you like. And I returned home, and that started me on a journey of personal development, as most people would call it. Not what I called it there and then, but that's what most people would call it now. And during that journey over the last 10 years, I've met, some amazing people, but it's led me to finding, or led my purpose to find me almost. And now I get to share some of my story and help some people with the way, some of the things that I've learned along my journey, and can pass on to them.
Yeah, because I remember you telling me this story, and I remember specifically when we were talking last time, you talked about the car accident and how bad it was, and how the people who were there helping you guys, first responders, were saying that you shouldn't have survived this accident. And when you bring up that point of, you were going out and you said goodbye to your wife and you had no intention of coming back. You were like, this is it, I'm done. And then you were walking out into the woods and you started questioning yourself and asking yourself, why didn't I die in that accident?
Yeah.
There must be some reason or something for me to still be here right now, and thinking and, trying to move forward. And I think that's so, huge, especially that you bring up, the fact that that's how your purpose found you, instead of what a lot of people do is trying to find their purpose. What am I here for? Why am I here? Trying out different things and doing that. But you really had that come to you, and you talk about that journey of personal development and growing yourself and taking that journey and seeing these changes in yourself and being able to really teach that to other people and give hope to other people in that way. Because I think that is, basically the entire message that I really love to focus on in all these episodes is, giving hope from situations that were so ugly and so bad. And, when you bring up the bankruptcy and losing that business that you built with your wife and doing that together, and then having 2008 come and just crash, and the financial crisis, and losing this bankruptcy, and struggling with, what you're doing in your life and where you are, but really being able to come out of that the way that you did, and to, help people in that way, I think is amazing and so, so important. And I know that last time you also shared with me that you spent most of your career chasing the next best thing to be happy, and you were doing this all the time. So how did this make you feel, and how did you move past that?
Yeah, it's it is something I talk a lot about. This idea that I developed what I call this when then mentality. So when I've got this, then I'll be happy. When I'm a sales manager, then I'll be happy. When I drive this car, when I earn this amount of money, when we live in this house. And what I realized throughout that career, it didn't just stop after I started my personal development journey. What I also learned was, in the first few years of my personal development journey, I just shifted my when then mentality into the personal development world. I was like, when I've been to this event, when I've learned this, when I understand this, when I've seen this person speak, when I've met this person, all of those things, we get on this kind of hamster wheel of, as soon as I achieve something, it's like, okay, what's next? I need to go somewhere else. And I realized that every time I got to some level, I felt unfulfilled. I was becoming frustrated with the idea that, but I thought this would be everything. I thought I would feel happy now. I thought, this would be it. And it wasn't. I was just driven to do something else. And it wasn't until later on, maybe over the last 3 or 4 years, where I really started to understand that happiness is not something we get.
Mm-hmm.
It's something we are.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when we really understand that actually, you know, that I can be happy without any of those things. You know, I've been blessed over my life to be able to travel to some amazing places. And one of the things that always struck me was I could visit places, you know, I've been in India and various other places, and I've seen people with, you know, what we would class as, you know, utter poverty, and yet they're happy. And it always struck me as, well, how is that possible? How are they happy with, you know, far less than any of us would ever imagine would make you happy? And so that was a question that I kept thinking about. And you know, I realized it during my journey that happiness is not things that we get. It's not what we get from things external to us. You know, we can be happy, and usually when we're happy, you know, things happen for us. So the happiness is there first. Actually, it's not something we get when we achieve something.
Yes, I love how you talk about that shift, because it's so common to think of that when then mentality that like you're talking about, when I do this, then this will happen. Or when I get here, I'll be good, I'll be successful, I'll be fulfilled, I'll be the best version of myself. And I feel like, it's so common to tie happiness to something. It always has to go with something.
Yeah.
Happiness goes with that or with this, but it can never just be on its own. And I love how you flip that into saying, you're able to experience that regardless of these different things. And, like you said, you lived that and you experienced that of, doing different things and, setting different goals, accomplishing those goals and still not feeling happy, and then thinking, okay, maybe if I do this, then I'll get there. But I think it's so important, and especially, bringing up that point of this when then mentality and how that's tied to our idea of happiness and if we'll ever get to that place. So what is that? Because I know you were bringing up that point, which is amazing, with what happiness means to you. So what does it mean to you?
Well, I think that the key for me is that you know, I'm I'm happy when I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and that doesn't. I don't necessarily have to be. I don't have to have anything to do that. And I think that's the most important thing. You know, when people think about, you know, I've had this conversation before when people say, yeah, but I'm happy when I'm doing, you know, X, Y, and Z. I'm happy when I'm visiting my family, or I'm happy when I'm doing this. And I always say, okay, so have you ever been happy when you weren't doing that though? Have you ever been happy just not doing anything, just kind of sitting? Or and people will say, well, yeah. Okay, so happiness is not tied to those things then. It just is something that we inherently have. It's just we need to understand that as opposed to thinking that it becomes attached to something external. You know, if we externalize problems, then we externalize solutions. If the problem is out there, then we assume that the solution is out there. When we actually take the problem inside, when we say, okay, it's to do with something that's within, then we have all the tools we ever need to solve those problems. All the solutions are in there as well.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things that you talked about last time that I thought was really amazing and interesting was the concept of being in the way or on the way. You brought up this really great comparison. So you were talking to me about Olympic hurdlers and how before the race, hurdles is all they see in front of them. That's all they see. And you said, are those hurdles in the way or are they on the way to where they need to be? And I thought that was so interesting the way that you brought that up in that comparison. So what do you think the main difference is between in the way versus on the way?
Yeah, and you know, I use the analogy a lot because it's good visual. People can see what we mean when we say, you know, are they in the way or on the way? But when they're in the way, the problem is that that's all you see. You know, so more of those hurdles show up because that's all of our field of vision looks at. We just see them as being problems. And I use my own experience of this. So in 2008, in the middle of the financial crisis, when I was losing a business and everything was collapsing around me, all I saw were hurdles. I could only see problems. And everywhere I looked, something else was going wrong. Yet in the same period, there were people who launched businesses that are now billion-dollar brands, and they didn't see those times, those hurdles as being in their way. They just saw them as, on the way to where they wanted to be, just exactly the same as the Olympic hurdler does. They're not in his way. They're just on the way to where he needs to be. And having that mindset shift, and I didn't have that in 2010. All I saw were hurdles. And that makes for a really difficult period of time. And I use that now, when I'm coaching people, I talk a lot about this idea that when you're in the picture, it's really difficult to see the frame. We just see all of the problems that we have. And sometimes just by taking a step back, just having that field of vision that says, actually, these are not just in my way. They're on the way to where I need to be. There has to be a solution to this. And then you take a bigger viewpoint of what's happening. That allows you then to look at it from a different perspective. One shift in perspective gives you a whole different meaning to what you're looking at. There's a saying that says that when we change the way we look at things, what we look at changes.
Yes, I think I love that saying, and I think that's so important how you talk about that shift in perspective, and you bring up that, another great comparison with the picture examples. You talk about, when you're in the picture, it's hard to see the frame because you're in that, and all you see is the problems, like you said. So, you could either look at those hurdles as things that are preventing you from moving forward. And then when you look at it that way, it's a lot easier to see more problems because all you see, in the first place are problems. So more start to come out and you start to see more coming and more coming. And it becomes very challenging, like you said, to see those things as being on the way to where you're going. So I love that. I think it's a great example because, I always love analogies and comparisons that you can actually visually see in your head and think and use that and compare that to your life and say, wow, what kind of things have I had in my life that I think are holding me back or keeping me from doing this or trying that, or what is it? And it really makes you have a different awareness of that instead of, just jumping to this is what it is and having that mentality. And I would love to hear, for you, like, what was that work like when you started getting into personal development and shifting your mindset? What was that like to go from the place that you were once in into the way that you are now?
Yeah, and I'd like to say it happened overnight and everything was cool and easy, but it doesn't work like that. I spent a long time, doing my own research, learning from some of the greatest people I could find. Both from those who still passed, so reading books from other people, but also the people who are around now. Attending events. Listening to people like Tony Robbins and Les Brown and Bob Proctor and Brendan Burchard, all the great people that are out there, and just taking the bits that really resonated with me, the bits that I could question and understand, and I just tried to look at everything with this kind of, like I say, this different perspective all the time in terms of, okay, so what does that really mean? And it's a question that has become kind of a mantra for me, is that every time I come across something that I feel is either a block or an obstacle, my question is always, what does that really mean? Particularly when we personalize things. Because often, something happens, it can be small or it can be quite major. If we took, the business, when my business failed, we can look at that and say, what are all the reasons that happened? Why did that happen? How did that end up? For most people, including myself at the time, we personalize that. What we do is we say, well, what that means is that I'm a failure. Not that the business failed, but I'm a failure. When we do that, we take on that identity. We hold that, and that stops us doing things in the future. When we start to understand that that's the way things work, and that actually the event itself doesn't have any inherent meaning until we interpret it a certain way. When we understand that, and it's a very simple statement, that events have no inherent meaning, but when you truly understand it, it's life-changing. This idea that, there isn't anything out there that can, or anybody or any situation or anything that can make me feel a certain way. Only the way I interpret those things can make me feel that way.
Wow, and that's so powerful, just the way that you say that, because I feel like when you break that down, like taking that and personalizing that failure and seeing that as a representation of you are the failure, instead of, the business failed, or, when you get a bad grade, you're like, okay, I'm a failure because I failed this class or this course, or you didn't pass, or because I can even think back to, and everyone can do this, everyone can do this with their life. Think of a time when, you think you didn't do good at something, and did you take that personally, or how did you handle that? Like, what was that process like? And I think it's so important to, what you said is to see what that taught you, and to see how you can move forward from that experience, rather than taking it so personal. Because, like you told me before, when you do that, it makes it very hard and almost impossible to do anything else, because you see yourself as a failure, and you basically don't see yourself as capable of doing something else, because all you can focus on is, well, this business failed and I'm a failure. Then it starts to become, like you said, a hamster wheel of, this happened, this is going to happen, and all these fears start to come up. But I think that's really a huge thing that you bring up, of not personalizing failure, and looking at that a different way. And like you said, when you look at things a different way and are able to shift that thought that was holding you back, or was keeping you feeling stuck, or feeling in this place of, I can't do this, I won't be able to, but you start to question and say, what does this mean? And I think that's so, it's so simple, but it's also so powerful, because it lets you internally change the way you speak to yourself. And
Yeah.
like you said, when you change that and can change that, inner dialogue you have with yourself, then things start to change, because you're not taking that so hard, and like, it's so impossible to move forward, which I think is, super important to bring up. And I think that's a really good example that you just gave, with your business, and, bringing up the business and how the business failed, and how at that time in 2010 you weren't able to see it differently. You took that personally. And, what is that like now, looking back at that, and remembering that time, and remembering how you took that? What kind of thoughts do you have about that?
Yeah, so when I look back now, I look at it differently on the basis that it no longer it does. I don't identify with it. So people say, "Oh, so have you just blocked that out?" No, because there was lessons I could learn from that. So there was things that I could take from it to say, okay, I'm not going to make that mistake again, or I'm not going to do that again. But that doesn't mean anything about me. It didn't mean I'm personally a failure. It mean I might not have had the awareness, or I might not have had the knowledge, or the skills at any given time to be able to do something. But I talk a lot about the difference between identity and roles. And when we play a role in a particular, whether it's the role of a business owner, or the role of a father, or we have skills. And I did this with somebody the other day, a client of mine recently. If you took a scale of 1 to 10 in the role and said, from 1 being the worst version of that role, the worst set of skills, and 10 being the best, where would you put yourself? And most people will say probably 6 or 7 or 8. If you think you're really good at it, maybe 9. Very few people will say they're a 10. We've all got something to learn. The issue comes with, if you did an identity test and you said, with 1 being the worst version of you possible and 10 being the very best version of you, where do you put yourself? Most people don't get above about a 4 or a 5. And then you end up with this mismatch. So you've got kind of, even if you've got good at what you do. So if someone had said to me when I was in the corporate world in sales, on a skills basis in your role, where do you see yourself between 1 and 10? I'd have said a 9. But if someone had really took the time to say to me from an identity level, where do you see yourself as a person? I'd have probably said a 4 or a 5. And then we've got this mismatch.
Wow, that's yeah, that is so interesting that you bring that up. The how mismatched that is. When you talk about you rating yourself based on a role or a statement like that, and then when it comes back to identity, is that because do you think that's because identity seems so much more personal to you? And like, when you bring up that point of, the business failing, I'm a failure rather than the business failing. And when you talk about identity, that's I am a success, I am a failure. And people are like, why do you think that there's such a difference between those two?
And so what happens is that's where, people talk a lot about things like imposter syndrome and this feeling of not feeling good. That's where it comes from, is that our identity level is down here, but our skills in any particular job could be up here, our role. So we might be a really good father or a really good mother, or, really good at sport, and we pitch our skills up there. But when it comes down to us as an individual, our self-worth, our own value on ourselves can be really low. And that causes us problems. It puts us under pressure. So the number of times I work with business owners or senior people who have got their skills at, an 8 or a 9, but are now struggling personally at a 3 or a 4 because they've taken everything personal. Their identity's being crushed. And then they have to wear this game face for, 8, 10 hours a day of someone who's up here in terms of skills. They're trying to get their identity up there. It's hard work. It wears people out. That's how come they end up with, stress and all of the anxiety that goes with it, because they're putting themselves in that position of being stressed on a daily basis.
Wow. And I love how you talk about that difference, and, how you have somebody who, could be, very high level in a corporate position, and their skills are like 9, 10, but then they say, I feel like my identity is much lower, and talking about those issues and relating it back to personalizing things, right? So maybe, whatever it was, whatever situation, taking that so personal and seeing that as a bad thing, a failure, something to carry shame about, or have guilt, or be embarrassed and carry these feelings, but then also not being able to express those and having to have this face of, confidence and, no vulnerability, not showing any weakness, but then inside having those experiences, but then they're not going anywhere. They're still there, and they're still inside that person. And, really kind of tying that back to happiness, and, how people can take it to the level of, if I do this, then I'll be happy, but not being happy on our own. Like you said, just sitting there as a person, breathing, just being alive. Because I think that's so interesting too, to even hear about that from, the comparing identity, comparing roles. And I think that's, another huge thing that could even be another turn into another episode, another conversation with you. But I think that's so true. And, I feel like, we're never done learning or growing or working on so many areas of our lives, and just trying to be better, trying to improve, trying to learn more. And, I wanted to ask you something. So what do you think the primary difference is between reacting and responding, and how does this difference impact us?
Okay, so I use it when I talk about an explanation around this idea that events have no meaning. And what usually happens is, when something happens, an event of some type, we react. The normal day-to-day experience is of reaction, which means that there's no considered space or thought. There's no awareness. It becomes a subconscious, automatic reaction to something. And for me, a response, the difference between react and respond is that a response is when you consider that. You take some time, if you like, a space. I use an analogy sometimes where I say it's like stepping into the back seat of the car and giving yourself a bit of breathing space so you can see what's happening, but you're not actually driving. And you give it a bit of time and a bit of breathing space to consider actually what's the best way to respond to this, and then taking the appropriate action. So that gap, if you like, that space, for me, is the difference between reacting and responding. 99 times out of 100, most people react, and 99 times out of 100, a reaction usually leads to us ending up apologizing for something later on, because we say something before we've had a chance to think about it, or we react in the situation. Whereas the ability to be able to respond gives you that time to take a breathing space. It does two things for me. One is it gives you that breathing space to decide how you should react or respond to consider the outcomes. But more importantly, it also gives you that breathing space. For me personally, over the years, it's given me that breathing space to ask that question and say, but what does that really mean? What do I know
Yeah.
about this event, this situation? and why should it make me feel any particular way about it? Why is it causing me to feel this way? And that gives you, again, that shift to be able to change how you respond to it.
Yeah, and I love how, when we were talking, you bring up the difference between that and how that can impact you. But I would like to know, from you, what do you think would make it more possible for people to be able to switch over from reacting most of the time, like you said, 99% of the time we have a reaction to something, to being able to respond more?
And I think there's two things. The first thing is gaining an awareness that events have no meaning. So when we understand that actually it's not the event that's causing me to feel this way, it's not what that person said, it's not the car that cut me up, it's not somebody's actions or an event that's happened that makes me feel this way. It's the way that I think about those events, the way that I um, interpret those events that causes me to feel this way, and that it's those feelings that are leading me to react, to behave in a particular way. And so asking that question, understanding that events have no meaning, and then asking the question about, what do I actually know? What does this mean? Gives you time to reflect on that before you do something and react instantly, so you can become consciously aware of it. And then you can take the time to consider, okay, what's the appropriate way I should respond, and therefore my behaviors will be according to that.
Yeah, because I think that's so important to really understand that, especially when you talk about awareness, right? Awareness is huge, because I know sometimes, even, I feel like a lot of the time, I can catch myself reacting to things, or something happens and then I do something and then I'm like, why did I do that? Or like, why did I say that? Or like, and then like you said, it brings up apologizing or something else, or you spending so much time thinking about the situation, or playing it over in your head and just really letting it ruin your day and drag you down. And like you said, it's not the event that is causing or whatever happened to the event causing that. It's, your reaction to that and your perception of that, and really being able to learn that, because I feel like that's such a really good skill to be able, I mean, if you can master that, I think that's amazing and incredible, to be able to respond to things way more than reacting, because I feel like that would benefit you just in so many different ways, mentally, just happiness, and having a good time in your life, instead of allowing so much of our time to be taken up by thinking about these things that happen and how we reacted, and how and then it just starts to snowball into all these other things. But if you can do that, then you really are almost invincible, like you said, because you control your perception of things. And especially when you bring up, I mean, you brought up a lot of good points. We talked about failure, and the perception of failure, and not personalizing that. And, if you can do that with anything in your life, a business that failed, or relationships, or different things that you're dealing with, but then being able to move forward from that and not take that as, I am this, and
Yeah.
internalizing that and letting that really completely eat away at you and prevent you from doing anything like that again,
Yeah.
is huge.
Well, I think, we've mentioned this before, but I think that the other thing is that what we tend to do as well when something happens is we start to look for things to blame. So we lay fault with something, and I'm a big believer in there's a difference for me between fault and responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
So the car accident, as an example, was not my fault, but I can take absolute responsibility for everything that happened around that event and after that event. And so, when things happen to us, it may not be our fault that event actually happened, but we can take responsibility for how we respond to what happened. And that, for me, is that's a key difference. If we stop personalizing things in terms of the I am, but we also stop blaming ourselves, we don't want to say it was my fault. And we don't have to do that, but we can say I'm responsible for everything that happens from here on in.
I love that. I love that. Really being able to shift that, instead of saying, this was my fault, or this was this person's fault, or this was because, and instead of looking at it like that and saying, what can you do to move forward? and focusing on that. And I think, all the things you brought up were really great. All these examples and analogies and comparisons of how to move from this place to a better place, and how you really did that yourself in your own life, based on the things that happened to you and the situations that you were in, and, really being able to turn that around. So I think, I just want to say thank you to you, Dean, for being able to come on and just, chat with me, share more about your story, your experiences, and just the awesome insight that you have from the experiences that you gained and really lived through. So thank you.
You're welcome. It's been a real pleasure. And, I always say that I talked earlier on the fact that, I think our purpose finds us, and I'm eternally blessed and grateful that every time I get an opportunity to share some of that, I'm fulfilling the purpose that I had, was to share this information with as many people as I can, in order that, we touch somebody else's life who may need it at the time that they hear this.
Yes, you are 100% right. And I think that is so true that, your purpose really found you and you are completely living it. And I'm happy that you were able to come on and, share that and dive deeper into these topics. And, whoever is listening can take away something from what we talked about, what we said, and really be able to apply that to their life, or, hand this message over to someone else they know who could benefit from it. So, it was a great conversation, great talking with you. I loved chatting with you, like the two times that we got to talk. And I'm excited to put this episode out there into the world. And everybody listening, I hope that you guys have a good rest of your day, good rest of your night. And bye, guys. And bye, Dean.
Bye, Paris. It's been a pleasure.